Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 3 of an exciting new series. What if Deku had plant manipulation quirk? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Micmager on archiveofourown.org. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. How good of you to join us here, All Might. Tashinori slowly picked himself up out of the crater he dug into the ground after being slung into and through most of a 5-story office building, thankfully empty at this time of night. He wiped a line of blood from the corner of his mouth and stood facing his greatest nemesis while the fire raged on around him. He detested the fact that he wasn't able to remove this monster from the city before the fight started, but he luckily had Torino helping to evacuate the civilians with Night Eye. He took in a deep breath to steady himself before deciding to go with a bit of psychological warfare and to hide him, checking to make sure his insurance was still in the pouch hidden under his belt. He could feel the small container there, against his skin, being held there just in case he needed it, and the monster had to assume he was dryly patting the dust from his costume. You know, Shigaraki? Pat, pat, pat. With the materials we have access to nowadays, you'd think they'd have invented a fabric that wicks dust away by now. For once we agree on something, Yagi. It is good to at last have common ground with you. It will make it oh so much more pleasurable for me when I rip my brother's quirk out of your dying body. Came the response, obviously slightly miffed and confused that All Might of all people wouldn't be taking their circumstances seriously. He always was one for theatrics. It made him one of the absolute worst beings on the planet since he knew what to do for maximum response. I'm afraid I can't allow that. You see, Mugen, I'm not here to play with you. I'm not here to humor you. I'm not here to let you leave this place in anything more than a body bag, if that. I have come here to crush you, to obliterate you, to annihilate you, so that this world will finally be free of your particular brand of evil, Tashinori said, foregoing all of his usual boisterousness. He had been fighting this man's criminal empire for over 3 decades now, and he was ready for this nightmare to be over finally. Oh, the hero plans to murder me? What would the public do if they found out about this little plan of yours, Tashinori? Wait, how? How did you know that name? The anger, the fury, and dare Tashinori say it, the fear radiating off of the monster in human flesh in front of him was something he dreamed of seeing and hearing every time he closed his eyes at night. He knew that as a hero he shouldn't, but he was going to enjoy snuffing the lights out on this particular villain. I have had the fortune to speak with Yoichi-san for a while now. He is somehow even more disgusted with what you have become than he was when you murdered him nearly 200 years ago. He has placed his trust in me to let the sun shine on a world devoid of your shadow. I will not fail his expectations, Tashinori said, getting into a combat-ready stance, waiting for the moment he would rush into the hardest fight of his life. He plastered a smile on his face again. This time it wasn't the one for the public or the news crews, no. This one was a more genuine smile reserved for his friends and confidants. He had one shot at this fight with no backup for either side, and he was going to make the most of it. How dare you use my given name? I will rip your spine from your body and shove it down your throat. When I am done torturing you, I will take what is mine and rule this world like I should. The madman screamed as he shot forward, activating numerous quirks in an attempt to bring down the symbol of peace to clear the way for his future reign. The two behemoths of power clashed, destroying the surrounding buildings and roads without pause as they slammed into each other in the most brutal ways they could. The fight raged on for nearly an hour before both parties backed away to catch their breaths and wipe the blood and sweat away from their eyes. It was during this time that a shout came from the perimeter of their fight, one that both combatants knew well for different reasons, along with a rush of flame aimed at the villain opposite him. As bright and hot as the flames were, they did very little to the man other than prevent him from catching his breath, but in a fight like this, that was all Tashinori needed. He threw himself back at the villain, who was still waving smoke from his eyes, and connected his strongest blow ever, directly into the thing's sternum, relief filling him as he heard the telltale sounds of bones being crushed from the impact. Shigaraki Mugen was folded forward over himself from the punch, spitting blood and desperately gasping for air, and now absolutely terrified of the hero in front of him. He had assumed he was still at least twice as strong as the quirk his brother passed on for all these years, and the assumption was putting him in a dire situation. He felt the ground quake as All Might rushed forward again to follow up from the previous strike, and he sent out a desperate fist aimed at the stomach of the man who might just be able to follow through on his promise of ending him. He was surprised when the blow missed, All Might having flicked the air and altered his trajectory just enough to avoid the hit before slamming another massive fist into his face this time, striking his temple and nearly knocking him out. He refused to lose. He refused to die like this. He was not going to die in a crater in the middle of a small city, with not even any news crews to see his glorious fight. He grabbed All Might's wrist and put everything he had left in him into a final shot and flung his fist forward with everything he had, all his weight, momentum, and every quirk he could think of to increase the force of the blow was put into motion as time seemed to slow down, and the air parted before his fist as it sank into the flesh of his nemesis. The wind pressure following the initial piercing of flesh as he blasted what he assumed to be the majority of All Might's stomach, lung, and if he was lucky, it maybe hit his heart too. All Might stumbled back after taking the hit, blood already pouring from the wound as he fell to his knees and tried to hold his remaining organs in place. He looked up to see All for one standing and turning to the heroes on the sidelines to gloat over his victory, which gave him the chance he needed. While Shigaraki was monologuing, he surged up and forwards and wrapped his hands around the villain's head, his voice coming to an abrupt halt as Toshinori allowed himself to say one last thing to the thing that had plagued the world for 2 whole centuries. Your time has come, Mugen. I hope you rot in the deepest parts of hell for all eternity, for all of the lives you have taken and are ruined. No further sounds came from him as he pushed one for all as hard as he could, ignoring the blood loss from the wound in his side while he squeezed his hands together as hard as he physically could. The human skull can only take so much pressure before it breaks, and even if the thing that used to be human in his hands had a multitude of durability-enhancing quirks, there was still only so much he could take. The villain's head popped in his hands. Blood and chunks of bone, cartilage, and brain matter spewed everywhere before he let go and fell backwards, hearing the muted sounds of his teacher flying towards him and the pounding of boots from the other 2 men in the area. He waited until Torino got close enough before speaking as loudly as he could, which was at this point barely audible whispers. Gran, under my belt on my hip, there's a container. He didn't need to say anything more as the older man shoved his whole arm under the torn part of his costume and fiddled around where he was told and grabbed the container in question. Open it. Put in my mouth, he managed, his vision going dark and the sounds becoming more muted by the second. Sorahiko was frantic in his attempts to open the damn thing. It was a sliding latch. Why didn't Toshi tell him about this sooner? What was inside the thing that was so important that it had to be done now instead of getting the oaf to the hospital? He managed to open the latch and saw an unimpressive-looking being. Normally, he would chastise his stupid student and start moving him to get help, but he saw the light fading from his eyes and hoped that whatever this being was could work a miracle. He shoved the thing into Toshinori's mouth and waited. Nothing happened for a few moments, and he considered forcing the oaf to swallow the damn thing himself when he saw the big guy's jaw moving and heard him crunch into the bean and swallow very slowly. What happened next will go down as the strangest thing Sorahiko Torino would ever see. He watched as the color started coming back to his student's face, and the wound began to rapidly close itself, his internal organs rebuilding themselves in front of his eyes. The whole process took less than 5 seconds. His student went from on death's door to pulling himself up off the ground on shaky legs and searching the surroundings in under 10 seconds before he walked over to the corpse of the villain that very nearly killed him. All Might, how are you up and moving again? I saw that villain carve out most of your left side, came the frantic shouting of Mirai, while the newest arrival stood in shocked silence as he stared at the hole in All Might's costume. I ate a really good bean, Toshinori said, giving a short barking laugh while he composed himself, his eyes never leaving the body Endeavor, he called out with no trace of joy in his voice. All Might, Endeavor responded, still coming to terms with what he witnessed over the last hour during the fight and the climax of said fight. He did, however, notice the older hero's tone and prepared himself for instructions. I need you to incinerate this villain's corpse. All Might told the Flame Hero, watching the body without blinking. If Endeavor thought it was a strange or outlandish request, he didn't say anything about it. He simply stepped forwards and readied himself to carbonize the monster he watched nearly take out the strongest man on the planet. He had just started with his flames when everyone there noticed black sludge pouring from the body's mouth, and he was unable to turn up the heat high enough before the seemingly dead body was whisked away. He turned off his flames, and the four men stared at the spot the body used to be for several seconds before All Might fell to his knees and screamed his newly repaired lungs out while slamming his fists into the ground. No one there had the heart to try to calm the big guy down with what had just happened, so they stood there in solidarity and to provide support if the situation changed. 1 hour later, Midoriya residence. We are coming to you live now from the crater left behind by the massive explosive the villain, who is yet to be identified, detonated here in Shimada just a half hour from Shizuoka. The devastation is widespread, but luckily there have been no reported casualties. Police say that All Might and a small group of heroes working with him had evacuated the civilians beforehand, and there were only a few stragglers still around when the fight started, which meant that the heroes on scene were able to prevent the loss of any life other than perhaps the villain himself. We will continue to bring you more information as we get it dash. Izuku sat on the couch watching the news with Himiko and Eri while Inko finished cleaning the dishes from Desert. The children were watching the story unfold with rapt attention, it being the most destruction of public or private property in a single villain attack in Japanese history. They continued watching for the last hour before bedtime and turned in for the night, none the wiser as to how impactful this fight was. 1 hour 45 minutes ago, Denki POV. Denki was walking around with a couple of his friends from school, trying to burn off the fat from dinner, when out of nowhere one of the other guys tripped and fell into the kid standing next to him, who toppled over and smacked into Denki. The resulting force knocked the boy over and into the wall of one of the abandoned warehouses lining this side of the road, and his quirk activated on instinct as he smacked his head against the bricks. He just happened to have been holding onto a weathered power conduit leading from the meter underground as he braced himself for his fall, and his palm just so happened to be in contact with the copper cable running power to who knows where. This did mean that Denki did not run the risk of shorting his brain this time, so silver linings, he guessed. He picked himself up and helped his buddies up as they continued on their way back home, now, to get someone to check their wounds. Neither of the three of the boys looked back at all. Why would they? After all, it's not like that random series of events could have had any lasting consequences. 10 minutes later, Kyodai Garaki finally finished prepping for the surgery to save his MSDR's life, and forced his Nomu to warp him back to the underground operating room they had set up under one of the old warehouses here in Saitama. No one would ever think to look for it here. It was perfect, until he stepped into the raging inferno that is. Everything was on fire. Flames were licking the walls all around the room. The sprinklers weren't coming on. His equipment was ruined. And worst of all, his car was starting to look like charcoal. There was no conceivable way to fix this. The doctor turned around and walked back through the small portal again so that his Nomu could close it and not have the fire spread to his personal lab. Now what? Garaki had no idea what to do now. Sure, he had a copy of the MSDR's quirk, and he was told that Tenko, or rather Tamura, would be receiving his quirk eventually, so theoretically, he could implant the quirk into the boy. Maybe do the procedure they had been putting off until he was fully grown, but the boy likely wouldn't survive the procedure right now. The best course of action would be to relocate all of the MSDR's assets and buy time for the boy to grow so that he could implant all for one into the boy and let the copy of his MSDR's consciousness take over as planned. Sure, it'd take a while for the boy to fully mature, but Garaki had time, and they had resources. He would leave the boy with the Nomu he had finally finished creating. Truly a marvel, this one. A very useful coordinate-based warp quick made from the combination of a few other quirks and a smoke generation quirk. The Nomu also retained his ability to think, though they did apply several levels of mind control over it to maintain control. The boy had called the new Nomu Kirojiri. No one ever said the boy was good at naming things. Really, naming him Black Fog just because he was made of black fog was just rude. He had decided he would wait the remaining decade for the vessel to mature. Time to remove himself from the hospital he was currently working at. He could spy on useful quirks later. The plan couldn't falter now after. Nearly 200 years of hard work. He turned to the Nomu at his side and told it to take care of the young Emissar until he could bring the true Inkar back in a decade. The Nomu obeyed his order and disappeared into its own portal, leaving the doctor to continue his research alone. Who knows, maybe he would be able to make a breakthrough that would impress the MSTR when he finally took over Tamura's body. The next day, Midoriya residence. Following the mass destruction last night in Shimada, a warehouse in Saitama caught fire and nearly collapsed. The building has already been set for demolition, but All Might showed up on scene for some reason 10 minutes ago and ripped a section of flooring out. We are too far away to see what's going on, but maybe he is searching for survivors. Izuku was once again sitting in front of the TV, alone this time due to the early hour, and was writing notes about the two incidents and wondering if they were at all connected to the Senza bean Nizu had requested a few days ago. He had no problem giving him one. They were meant to be used after all. He just wanted to know where they were used was all. All the dean had told him was that All Might would be holding on to it for a possible emergency. Well, it wasn't really anything new. Nizu-sensei rarely ever explained himself, and Izuku didn't expect him to start now after nearly 2 years of being his student. The last year had kind of flown by really. Between the training, studying, and the adding of Shoto to their group, all of the kids hardly realized the passage of time. Though, speaking of Shoto being added to the group, Komori had petitioned the group to add her pen pal as well. It'd take a couple of months due to just how far away the girl lived, but eventually Kodai Yui joined their group as well, and they couldn't be happier. Izuku had a long day ahead of him, and a surprise for Nizu-sensei after school let out. He sent a quick text wishing his friends a good morning and a good day before he finished getting ready and making breakfast for the rest of the house. His mother had been teaching the kids how to cook now for well over a year, and they were all at least a little competent in the kitchen, though no one really wanted Tenya anywhere near an oven. The boy couldn't improvise at all. If a package said to cook something for such and such time, he did exactly that. Nothing more, nothing less. So the group had been subjected to both overcooked and undercooked food one too many times, so he was now on perpetual food prep or drink prep duty. It was with a bright smile that Izuku walked up to Nizu's door that afternoon, certain that he was going to show Nizu something not even he would be expecting. He hadn't told anyone about the bush he had made. It had been growing for a few weeks in a spot at the edge of the containment area for the Black Mercy, so everyone else steered clear of it, even after he explained that it was just a holly bush, one of several that lined the outside of the fence. The setup was perfect. Now all he needed was for the dean to follow him back. "Good afternoon, Izuku. Are you ready for our lesson?" the Chimera asked in his usual chipper tone. "Actually, Nizu-sensei, I have something to show you if you have a few minutes." "Is it something you brought, or something in the garden?" "In the garden, sir. I've been working on something that I hope you'll enjoy." "In that case, lead the way, my boy. I can't wait to see what's got you so excited." The boy and the teacher made their way over to the bunker entrance he had just came from and re-entered the garden dimension, where Izuku led his favorite teacher over to the dangerous plant area and stopped in front of one of the holly bushes seemingly at random. "Here we are, sir. I've been working on this now for weeks, and it's been so hard to keep people from snooping on it." "I think you're going to be speechless this time, sir," the boy said as he reached down and gingerly pulled one of the small red berries from the bush and handed it to Nizu to examine. "Well, don't keep me in suspense, my protege. What does this do?" the dean asked while he rolled the thing in his paw absently. "A little over a year ago, you asked me how much I knew about first-generation stockpiling quartz, remember?" Nizu nodded to show he did. "Well, I decided to try to recreate that." Nizu visibly paled. He had definitely not been expecting that, but maybe the child didn't realize what this would mean. "Well, I was able to recreate the effects of the quirk just fine, and it's also super cheap to grow. The downside is that they do not start with any stored power. The bright side is that these work on the principle of perfect equal growth for the body, mind, and quirk. Basically, every time you exert effort after consuming this, you will, in the beginning, only have about 90% of your efforts reward the related results. The remaining 10% is broken down by the stockpile in your chest and used to gradually improve your body by burning excess fat, building muscle and stamina, as well as reinforcing and streamlining everything about your mind. You will gradually move and think faster as long as you are actively working out a few hours a day." Izuku excitedly explained to his mentor. not really understanding what he had created once again. Midoriya-kun, Nizu began in the tone of voice that Izuku knew to be associated with something close to reprimanding, which instantly made the boy freeze in place. You have once again created something with the potential to change the world. Don't deny so quickly. Tell me, do these little berries produce a quirk? No, sir. It's a quirk-like effect. So you have grown something capable of reproducing the effects of a quirk. Not just any quirk either, a stockpiling quirk. Arguably one of the most useful kinds of quirks, even when they only improve one aspect of the body with the stored energy. You have taken a full-body enhancer-type stockpiler and mass-produced it. Do you understand how much trouble these would cause if the public ever got wind of them? The Chimera chided. I honestly wasn't thinking of that when I started planning these, sir. I wanted something that worked with the hero's normal workout routine that would help them stay in shape and improve over time. Izuku said, thoroughly chastised and only now benefiting from that sweet, sweet mistress called hindsight. I don't want to say it's okay, because it isn't, but has anyone eaten one of these yet? No, sir. I had planned to give one to everyone tonight after showing them to you. Let me think. Nizu paused as he considered the possible ramifications of allowing the children to consume one of these as he realized he was missing two crucial bits of information. Midoriya-kun, what are this plant's limits? And does it work on all cells in the body, or just muscles, bones, and organs? Well, Izuku said, not wanting to look the diminutive Chimera in the eye, but eventually looking back to him, and biting the proverbial bullet, they don't have limits. The first-generation stockpile of quirks didn't have limits either, but no one lived long enough with one back then to give accurate information as to what happened when they stored too much energy for their body to handle. So to combat that, I had to section out separate percentages to improve the body while strengthening the body. This means that if the person who consumes one of these never stops working out, they would never stop improving. For the second question, I don't know. I'm not a biologist, and the thought when I created the seeds was to just improve the body to handle the constantly growing stockpile, sir. Midoriya Izuku, you have done precisely what you were instructed not to do. Nizu screeched, getting more than a little worked up over the carelessness of his pupil in this case. Sir? I don't know what you mean. Izuku said, head tilted in confusion. We told you not to create anything that could stop the aging process. But it doesn't? Right, he said, eyes blown wide open. Constantly improving the body might include replacing and improving dead or dying cells. You have possibly created conditional eternal youth. I'm going to take one of these to Recovery Girl to run some tests to see if I was correct. In the meantime, no one is allowed to eat one of these. The one upside to this situation is that you placed a condition on the creation that the person only improves if they put forth the effort to improve. So, while these could allow you to have eternal youth, they wouldn't outright prevent you from aging. You just need to stop working out regularly. Izuku was now drawing in on himself and crying freely. Something Nizu was loath to witness, as it reminded him too much of when he first met the boy, and he was a nervous wreck, so he took a deep breath to calm himself and considered everything again. He may have slightly overreacted. These weren't all bad. It would be hard to tell there was an issue for several decades really, and modern cosmetics would allow people to look older as well. He could also frame a recently deceased convict with a quirk that overclocks bodily functions on an experimental batch of trigger. That would be an acceptable excuse. Okay, reassure the boy, get the fruit tested, then find a suitable convict if necessary. It's going to be okay, Izuku. I'm just trying to stick to the rules given by your mother as they are for your own good. These aren't a bad thing. In fact, they are universally beneficial to whoever eats them. We just need to have all of the data before we let anyone eat one, and then a backup explanation for why so many people stopped aging when they reached their physical peaks. I have thought of a plan in that case, but testing comes first, the dean said while patting the boy's forearm. He allowed Izuku to return home to spend time with his family to get his mood re-elevated while he marched back onto campus to the nurse's office to see about the extent of the effects of these things. He didn't get very far before receiving a phone call from Tashinori. Remaining in the bunker, he took the call to see if the man needed any help. Nizu, sir. It's over. It's really over, came the hurried breathing and excited whispers from the number one hero. I'm afraid I'm not sure what you're referring to. I thought you were still searching for the body of All for One. Yes, sir. It has been found. Through some freak accident involving a group of children, one with an electricity generation quirk of impressive output, the BSDRD, is actually dead. I just had Endeavor help carbonize the remains. Mirai asked an acquaintance of his to use his quirk Bloodhound to point out the direction of the corpse based on leftover blood at the crater, and he took us to a warehouse in Saitama, where I found a hidden basement, and in the basement was the remains of Shigaraki Mugen and a ton of medical equipment that was ruined in the fire. We brought in someone with a forensic replay quirk to verify this was actually all for one and worked backwards to see how he finally died. The kid with the electricity quirk happened to grab the main power line for the hidden basement that just so happened to have exposed cables for easy access when he was knocked over by a stumbling friend. Needless to say, we are keeping the kids out of the police report as they don't need manslaughter on their records, even if I don't personally believe all for one counted as a man. Toshinori relayed all of the necessary information, with disturbingly few breaths taken. This means there's a medical professional on his side, who thought there was a chance to save him even with a crushed head and near full-body burns from Endeavor's first attempt at cremation. Niza pointed out, trying to make sure all loose ends were tied up. Indeed, sir. The doctor showed up on the forensic replay. It was a doctor operating in the Chiba area under the name Tsubasa Moritani who has now disappeared. We have given a photo of his likeness to law enforcement, and they are starting the search on their end, Toshinori said, relief plainly audible in his voice. You should be proud, Toshinori-kun. You have almost certainly put the final nail in the coffin of a 200-year-old boogeyman. You should take some time off for a vacation to unwind. You have been working nonstop for over 3 decades now. If you'll excuse me, though, our young gardener has created something crazy again, Nizu said, also feeling incredible relief now that a huge problem had been dealt with and he was going to be able to free up a lot of resources for other problems. When you finish looking into it, please thank the gardener for me. The bean was fantastic, came the giggled response from the man who had 30 years of stress almost entirely removed from his shoulders. Never have I been more thankful that a villain had an efficiency-boosting quirk, came the jovial tone of Nizu as he sipped on a cup of tea while looking over the report Recovery Girl had given him regarding a certain holly berry. Nizu, no, never mind, I don't want to try to figure out what's going on in your mind. I'll just speak about my discoveries regarding the berry. Recovery Girl sighed, once again wondering why she stayed employed under the rat. Oh yeah, the gratuitous sums of money and to make sure the young guns don't kill each other while they're in school. In short, these things are safe to consume. I wish I could give you more information about them, but all I can tell you is that they're harmless to the consumer and are very nutrient-rich. I ran a few tests because I wasn't sure if holly berries were meant to be eaten, which they're not. Normally consuming even 2 regular holly berries would induce vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration, and drowsiness. Thankfully, Izuku hasn't made normal berries. These wouldn't have any adverse effects if eaten, maybe just reinvigorating someone for a while, making it harder to fall asleep for a few hours. When are you going to tell me what these do, by the way? Nizu pondered both her answer and the written report she gave him with his normal approximation of a human smile for a few moments. Deciding to rip the bandage off now as opposed to later when they were with someone else rather than just himself, and one of the humans he trusts most in the world, he opened his maw, conditional immortality. He spoke and then went back to his tea while he continued reading the papers. Recovery Girl reacted as any other normal functional human being would when presented with information like that. The tea she was sipping on went spraying across the room, barely missing her boss and the equipment surrounding them through practiced ease and only landing on the floor. If she had the mental capacity to focus on anything else at the moment, she'd give herself a pat on the back for her aim. Unfortunately, she didn't, and was only able to hack violently for several seconds while trying to clear her airways until she raised her head and stared incredulously at the seemingly unfazed chimera in front of her. Explain. Now. Niza chuckled at his old friend's antics. She was always so expressive when they were speaking to each other in private. He was certain that had he been human, he likely would have taken her as a mate. Conditional immortality. That's what these do. I thought that was pretty self-explanatory, Chiyo, he said while giggling at the glare she was pointing his way. Okay, calm down. All that anger is going to raise your blood pressure. That description is accurate, but it's not what Izuku intended these to be. He was trying to create something to mimic the stockpiling quirks from the first generation of quirks, and due to a misunderstanding and a lack of foresight, these came about. What sort of misunderstanding turns a replica of a stockpiling quirk into an immortality quirk? She asked wryly. To be fair, he was working with basically no information on a topic that has stumped all of the quirk researchers for the last 200 years. I think he did admirably in his attempt, even if I personally disagree with the outcome. Skip the build-up, Nizu. Tell me what he made. Fine, though you really should stop being so impatient, Chio. He theorized that when first-generation stockpiling quirks gathered more energy than the human body could contain, even with the improvements to the body the quirk was granting, the quirk would trigger a sort of upgrade to occur in the wielder, rapidly improving the body to compensate for the increased power flowing through them due to the quirk passing the veritable point of no return. Without realizing it, he came up with a feasible answer to the old quirk singularity theory. So he created these berries to make that process constant, instead of just when the user would naturally reach the end point and be at risk of being killed by their own quirk. Recovery Girl hummed at this while she considered the thought process and took another sip of tea and a bite of her peach cobbler. It's not completely out of the realm of medical possibility, if I'm being honest. Unlikely, yes, but not impossible. You'd be far more likely to just die when you reach that point than to trigger what is essentially a quirk evolution, much like most other first-generation quirks did. What does he hope to accomplish with the constant improvement, though? Yes, that. Luckily, I had him explain to me in detail what he was thinking, or I'd have no way of explaining this to you. He was very methodical with this creation, more so than any of his previous seeds even. He paused to enjoy a bite of his chrysanthemum tea cakes and washed it down with another sip to stay hydrated. He made it so that anyone who consumed one of these would have a core created in their body, most likely just below the diaphragm, that gathered energy whenever the person exercised, applied themselves mentally, or used their quirk. They would, in the beginning, be able to utilize 90% of what they could have utilized before eating the berry, leaving 10% for the core to use in very specific quantities. 2% would be used to improve the body, mind, and quirk outputs each. The remaining 4% would go into fueling the stockpile, which can be utilized to increase physical capabilities like the first-generation quirks, improve the quirks themselves like we saw with Toshinori's predecessors, or use as a sort of battery, providing an energy source to compatible quirks and/or stamina to those with incompatible quirks. Truly, little Izuku is a genius. Recovery Girl's eyes widened at the description given and then narrowed in confusion as she thought through what she was told. That's all very good, and if I'm honest, that might even be how the first-generation stockpiling quirks functioned, but how does that lead to conditional immortality? Simple. He paused as she leaned forward slightly in curiosity. He forgot to add a limit. Her teacup clattered as her hands shook while holding it up to take another sip. She carefully placed it back on the plate and gingerly put both back onto the table, sitting in between the two adults, and, with practiced motions, brought her hand up to pinch the bridge of her nose. Of all the stupid things to forget, limitations are there for a reason. Living bodies aren't meant to improve indefinitely. He's lucky he considered the mental aspect as well, or he'd likely have created undying psychopaths unable to cope with their own power and lay waste to anything or anyone who got near them. That's it. The boy is taking medical classes from me before he does something like this again. Nizu could only laugh. Treehouse 1 week later. Finally, summer vacation is here, and we're all together for the first time in weeks. We should go to the beach, cried Mina. The girl had been bouncing on the ball of her feet all morning, waiting for everyone to arrive. Nizu had called a meeting for the parents and the adults in charge of the kids, which finally got the people who rarely had time to socialize to come together. She only had to wait now for whatever Nizu wanted to tell them, and then she could bring the girls out for bathing suit shopping. Yes, Mina, we know how much you want to go swimming. We're more than happy to join you later, replied one of the only voices of reason in their group, and possibly the one everyone else looked up to as the group mom. Momo having her hands busy restraining Himiko from launching herself at the pinkette in excitement. The two, when they got together, were notorious for causing minor disturbances, as they called them. Yes, it would be nice to go enjoy the beach now that we've finished cleaning it. I'm still surprised it only took us 2 months to clear all that junk. If I'd done it by myself, it would have taken years. Izuku called out from the other side of the tree house where he was working on his summer homework with Tenya, intending to get it all done now, so he wasn't caught trying to finish everything at the end of the vacation. He had offered to help the less academically inclined of their friend pile, but they weren't too happy to do more schoolwork when they just got out of school. All might have been informed of the kids needing a place to work out a bit of stress from the end of term testing, while also helping them build up their physical fitness. He came up with the idea to have the kids do some community service by cleaning a beach that had been turned into a junkyard over the years due to the tides washing scrap ashore and illegal dumping. They got lucky that Shoto was still living in Mizudafu, or they would have spent most of their afternoons on the train trying to get to Dagoba Municipal Beach Park and wouldn't have been able to do anything else before having to take the train back home. Izuku was still slightly apprehensive about being so close to Kaachan, but could go even after nearly 4 years away from the boy and most of the time spent with good friends who had slowly rebuilt his shattered confidence. He knew he had it in himself to forgive the boy, but he didn't really want to forgive him just yet, especially when he had yet to apologize. Thankfully, they never ran into each other while cleaning the beach, and the Todoroki estate was in the opposite direction of the Bakugo household from the beach, so the chances of running into the boy had been slim in the first place. His mental mumblings were halted by his mentor calling up from the ground that he had arrived, and Izuku rushed to the elevator carriage so he could greet his favorite teacher. The Chimera, whom Izuku had recently identified as a tiger quoll, but had been told not to tell anyone, so that Nizu could continue laughing at the wrong answers he got, was waiting for his personal student and his friends to make their way down to him and join the group of adults and teachers who had congregated by the peach trees. Izuku had grown them to flower all the time and to spread the pleasant smell of peach blossoms to anyone nearby more easily. It was a very welcome addition for everyone, and he'd gotten compliments from even the most stoic of visitors. Cough. The kids ran to sit by their parents or guardians and waited for Nizu to perch himself on the rock Taiyu had brought in for him for these types of meetings. Once every settled, Nizu cleared his throat and put the teacup that no one noticed he had been holding until that second on the small table to his left. Thank you all for clearing time in your schedules for this meeting. I appreciate the work a lot of you must have had to put forth to make this get-together happen, and we'll try to keep this short. As such, I want bother sugar coding the reason for the meeting. He paused for anticipation, in direct conflict with his comment about wasting no time, much to the annoyance of some of the attendees. Izuku has created something, by accident I assure you all, that will have far-reaching and indeterminate effects on our world as a whole. The adults looked at the boy who was sheepishly trying to look as small as possible while blushing up a storm. Most of them looked only a little exasperated, knowing the boy always meant well and wouldn't intentionally put anyone in danger. Several were looking at him with just a bit of annoyance, but only in so far as wondering how this might affect their work. Only a few looked at him in concern, whether that concern was for his well-being in case he'd made something harmful to himself, or concern over the look he was getting from his own mother for making something without telling her again, was anyone's guess. The kids glanced at him momentarily before putting their attention back on Nizu, as they were already used to Izuku doing things that sounded good to him, but an outsider would easily point out the issues for if he bothered to run the idea by them. Yes, he should have known better and all that. Nizu shook his head and gestured with his paw, drawing the attention back to himself. In his defense, the issue with what he made wasn't something a normal person would have even thought about, let alone planned to avoid. The adults threw the boy an apologetic nod, which he blushed harder at before Nizu addressed them with the prudent information. Izuku was doing some research on first-generation stockpiling quirks as part of the assignments I gave him for quirk studies. Nizu began while All Might snorted into his teacup to his left. The giant of a man coughed lightly a few times and waved off the concerned looks coming from everyone who glanced his way at his outburst and looked at the dean with not a little trepidation. He came to me with a very well thought out and put together report on the subject, and I thought that was the end of the topic. Imagine my surprise when he stopped me the other day as I was returning to the university and showed me a new project he'd worked on to surprise me with. A plant that produced a berry that, when eaten, would give its consumer something very similar to the first-generation stockpiling quirks. He picked up his teacup to take a sip while watching the chaos the first bit of information caused. He always enjoyed causing chaos after all. Quiet, came the bellow from Endeavor in full costume since he was leaving the meeting to go on patrol as soon as it was over. Dean Nizu, are you insinuating that he can give people quirks now? I'm not insinuating anything of the sort, came the reply, which caused a lot of those gathered to relax a little before his next words worked them back into a frenzy. I'm telling you clearly that while the effect doesn't give you a quirk, it does give you the effect of the quirk. If you eat one of these berries, you would, functionally, have a stockpiling quirk along with whatever you previously had. Thought the quoll chaos. It took several minutes and plenty of shouting from those that were on a strict timetable before relative calm could be reestablished. Eventually, All Might snapped his finger, and the crack of displaced air grabbed everyone's attention when he gestured to the grinning Dean, indicating the story likely wasn't over yet. Several embarrassing seconds later, and the majority of everyone's attention was back on Nizu. I trust you all got most of that out of your system there? I will try to clarify when I have the time if you want to call, email, or visit. That, however, wasn't the most exciting bit of news. If Nizu were physically able to smile wider than he currently was, he would be pushing those limits too. He couldn't wait to bask in the tempest he was about to unleash. Quick glances around the gathering allowed him to note the stiffness of most of the people in attendance at the prospect of quirks on demand not being the most noteworthy news. He took another sip of his tea and placed his cup down before clearing his throat to continue. No. The primary reason I called you all here is the unintended effect that came about as a result of the faux first-generation stockpiling quirk. You see, there's no documented records of what happens when the human body is unable to naturally keep up with the stockpile. Whether that be the raw physical power, the internal energy store, or the various other effects it could have on the body. No one from that era lived long enough to leave us enough information to make anything other than educated guesses. Now the primary emotion he could see was worry. It was worry before, but mostly because of the possible danger to the kids if anyone found out about gaining a quirk from eating a berry. Now it was worry over possible side effects other than the equivalent of a second quirk. Izuku here took a guess. A good, well-founded guess, but a guess nonetheless. Whether I or UA University's medical official, recovery girl here, he gestured to the elderly doctor to his right, who was visibly done with his antics, is inconsequential. In any scenario, it was going to come down to a matter of opinion, and anyone's opinion could have been right or wrong on this one. As I said, we simply have too little information to be sure. In this case, though, Izuku guessed that when the body couldn't keep up with the quirk would evolve and improve the body to avoid the user being killed by the eventual overload. We have seen this before with quirk evolutions, rare as they are, in that they change the user's body or the quirk themselves in drastic ways to make them either more powerful or more useful. His guesswork was based on that, and in an effort to avoid the lethality that sometimes comes with particularly violent quirk evolutions, Izuku opted to have the change occur over time while the stockpile grows. This leads to a gradual improvement of the body's ability to withstand the power of the stockpile. I don't think I need to explain why this is the safer method. There was, thankfully, no one in the area that couldn't understand that logic. Which leads us to the problem. There's that tension ratcheting up again. Normally, the aging process gradually slows us down and shuts down the body until death occurs. More hesitant nods, which cannot occur if the body is always in a state of improvement. The nodding continued, though it was joined by widening eyes and several people jumping out of their seats. Nizu held up a paw to staunch the shouts that he knew were seconds away from flying around. Izuku has created something that grants conditional immortality. Funnily enough, there was no shouting. Everyone simply turned towards the boy in question with the exact same expression on their faces. Complete and utter disbelief. Nizu loved it. Excuse me, Dean Nizu, a point of clarification if I may? Inusuke asked, once he managed to wrench his gaze from the boy who was currently doing his best to slip into the earth to avoid everyone's eyes. Of course, I'd be happy to try to answer your questions, right? You said conditional immortality. How is it conditional? An excellent question, Mr. Yaoyorozu. The answer to that question lies in the method by which energy is stored in the stockpile. It only gathers energy when effort is put into an action. Whether that effort is physical exertion, mental exertion, or quirk exertion. The stockpile core siphons off 10% of the effect of the exertion's output to do what it needs to do. Roughly 2% each for improving the body, mind, and quirk. The remaining 4% is used to build the stockpiled energy, which can be used to increase your physical capabilities or improve the effects of your quirk. An example of improving the use of a quirk would be like in the case of young Momo here, as compared to, say, young Ijiro. He waved to indicate the two children. Momo's quirk, for those who didn't know, allows her to create any non-living object as long as she knows the atomic makeup of the object. The creation process uses her lipids as fuel. She thought, until recently, that her quirk was turning her lipids directly into the object she made, but we found that her lipids are merely the most readily available power source. The girl in question nodded and patted Izuku on the knee in happiness for his help figuring that out. Ijiro's quirk, again for those who weren't aware, hardens his body from the outside in, into a rock-like substance, increasing his durability and offensive capabilities while it's active. Very effective, and the substance becomes more durable as well as deeper reaching the more he works his quirk out. With enough work, he might even be able to withstand a hit from our number one here. That's manly! Ijiro shouted as he jumped to his feet and pumped his arms, showing off the muscles he had been building. Very. Niza chuckled. Two very different quirks. Both would be affected differently by a stockpiling quirk working with them. In Momo's case, she would be using the stockpiled energy as fuel rather than her lipids, since it's a larger, more efficient, and safer option for her body. She would still gain increased physicality, of course, but the change to fuel sources would be a massive boon for her medically. Momo had her hands held over her mouth with fresh tears ready to roll down her cheeks at the thought of no longer needing to worry about possibly putting herself in the hospital on accident by making something too large or too many things at once. Her parents each rubbed her back reassuringly, both hoping to obtain a berry for their daughter to help her stay healthy. In Ijiro's case, however, Niza continued, though with a genuine smile, as he watched the Yaoyoroza family and the rest of her mates giving her attention, as his quirk doesn't use a fuel source per se. His version of the stockpile would work a lot like young Izuku's quirk does for him. Many of the more knowledgeable one in the audience nodded in recognition at that, though several weren't sure what he meant. Oh well, he was going to say it anyway. It would help improve his stamina instead. So both of them would gain a boost to physicality and some form of a boost to make their quirk either more powerful or more useful. Ah, that makes a lot more sense, came the under-the-breath muttering of several of the kids or the less mentally gifted adults. While this means that your body would effectively stop aging at a point where it reached its physical prime, it would only do so as long as you continued putting in the effort. You'd need to maintain at the very least strenuous physical exercise, mental acuity exercises, or using your quirk for several hours a day for the effect to continue. You could be immortal, you just need to put forth the effort, which means that you have the option, when you're ready of course, to just be mortal like everyone else. After all, living forever is terrifying, Niza said as he tried to instill the importance of what he was saying on everyone. He was right, of course. Immortality was absolutely terrifying to any normal being. It's good that the option is built in to just start aging again. I do have one more urgent question, though, after that explanation. Inasuk said, while still rubbing circles on his daughter's shoulder. What happens if you're already past your physical prime? Does your body just stay as it is, or do you begin to revert to your prime over time? I'm afraid we don't know yet, Mr. Yaoyorozu. We, after all, haven't tested the fruits on people yet, came Nizu's reply, which didn't give him or the others who wondered the same question an answer, but also reassured them that no one had eaten one of the berries yet. The purpose of this meeting was to let you all know about the existence of these berries, as well as to put it to a vote as to whether or not they should be consumed or destroyed. I have given you all the information I currently have. It just wouldn't have been fair to deny everyone else the opportunity to give their opinions on the matter. Nizu said, somehow holding a fresh cup of steaming tea and a plate of one of his new favorites, peach cobbler. My suggestion is to have a short discussion and then vote. Bear in mind the likelihood of others in the future consuming one of these berries as well, such as other heroes or hero students. The meeting lasted another half hour. There was a lot of yelling involved, but it was eventually agreed that the berries could be consumed. Many of the adults in attendance offered to be the testers for the batch, but a reprimand from Recovery Girl let everyone know that the changes caused would be gradual to the point of almost being unnoticeable for the first few months, other than a 10% decrease in physical ability, quirk usage, and the same increase in mental strain until the effects began to show. The exception would be for the heroes, as they were so active in all three categories that changes would be obvious after a week or two at the latest. It was decided to allow the younger heroes in training, i.e., Shota, Hizashi, Namiri, who had just recently graduated, and Tensei, the university was still reeling from the disappearance of Oboro, to be the first to use the berries. To find out if there was a de-aging effect that would be hard to explain to the public if, say, All Might or Endeavor were to start looking younger and younger. If they did, Nizu was prepared to sacrifice a convict he'd found from Iceland, who had a quirk that gave a huge boost to its target that he could reasonably say had an unfortunate accident with a batch of an experimental new strand of trigger. The option wasn't something that everyone wanted to explore if they didn't need to. With the plans made and the berries distributed to the current consumers, the meeting was adjourned and an appointment made for a month from now for the follow-up to see the effects. "All right, girls, time to go shopping for swimsuits," shouted Mina once everyone exited the garden dimension and the kids had made it to the backyard of the Midoriya household. Inko had already agreed to chaperone the girls to the local mall while she was still searching for someone to take and look after the boys for their trunks. "Swimsuits, eh? You were planning a trip to the beach without telling me, Inko," came a voice both Inko and Izuku knew well. The entire group of children and Inko turned towards the front gate, where an ash-blonde woman was standing next to a light brown-haired man waving at them all. "You should have told me. I would have brought my own suit." Mitsuki/Ani Mitsuki, shouted the mother and son respectively. The rest of the children watched in confused wonder as the two ran towards the newcomers in obvious glee. "Inky, Izuku, it's so good to see you both. I missed you guys so much," Mitsuki said as she brought them both into a crushing hug. Masaru joined shortly afterwards, though with notably less bone crushing to his hug. "Would you mind if Masaru and I dropped our luggage off inside real quick, and then we could join you and help wrangle the munchkins while they look for suits? Please. I wasn't sure who I was going to be able to get to help watch the boys." "Children, come meet my best friend and her husband," Inko said while holding Mitsuki's hands in hers. The kids walked over and introduced themselves while Izuku was off to the side looking around behind the Bakugo parents. Inko noticed this and looked her best friend in the eyes, Katsuki. Mitsuki sighed and shook her head. The brat is definitely better than he was 4 years ago, but he's still not ready to be around his old punching bag. His therapist is optimistic that he should be fully ready to reintegrate into the lives of his prior acquaintances soon, though. "Maybe by next summer break, we might be able to bring him with us." Masaru nodded his head slowly to corroborate, even though he was grimacing at the thought of how long it had taken to bring his son back from the brink of ruining his own life and the lives of whoever he chose to associate with. "All right then. I feel like the little nitro gremlin has had enough time to relearn how to not SCK, but I can wait another year," Inko said while shaking her head. She gave her best friend another hug before turning to Izuku. "Izuku, sweetie, Katsuki didn't come with him this time. His therapist says he might be able to next year. Be patient, okay?" Izuku noticeably drooped at this, having had the hope of seeing his old best friend again, and them actually being friends again, unlike the last 2 years of their relationship. "Okay, Mom. I hope I can see him next year then." Mood successfully lowered, the luggage was moved into the foyer, and everyone followed behind Izuku as he led them into the garden dimension again, taking the time to add Mitsuki and Masaru to the permissions list. They all exited out in one of Shoto's guest rooms after the Bakugo couple took a few minutes to gape at the fantastical plants on display. Shoto took a second to chat with his mother and sister, who were sitting in the living room working on some sort of sewing project, as everyone else moved towards the entrance of the Todoroki property to make the short trek to the train station to catch a ride to the mall. Shoto and his sister Fuyumi joined the group along with his brother Natsuo, as they were interested in going to the beach and didn't mind tagging along. What followed was a full day of kids throwing each other into deeper water, and adults really wanting to stop the dangerous behavior, but also not wanting to get up off the towels they had painstakingly set down just right under the comically large beach umbrella Momo had brought with her. She said it took an entire meal by itself to make up for the lipids she used making it. Speaking of Momo, she, Achiko, Himiko, Kyoka, and Mina for some reason were all trying to catch Izuku's attention, and then would laugh as he turned to them while they were making one funny pose or another in an attempt to not laugh too hard while blushing. Inko and Mitsuki watched this happen in glee, while Inko wrote down the words, "grand babies in the sand" for her fellow adults to see. She honestly couldn't be happier. Two walked up to the adults while they watched as Mina was sitting on Izuku's shoulders for a game of chicken fight, and they were locked in heated combat against Ijiro and Himiko. Yui was trying to get Tenya to join the rumble, but Tenya was steadfast in his refusal to join the fray until the victor had been decided between the first two groups. Eri and Komori couldn't stop laughing from the shallower area where they were looking for seashells. "Excuse me, Karo." Inko turned her head to the side and raised an eyebrow at the little frog girl. "Yes, to you, dear? May I sit with you for a few minutes? I have a question I'd like to ask, and I don't want the others to hear me right now." "Of course, dear. Please, come get comfortable and tell me what's up," Inko said, hoping to reassure the girl that she had no problem answering whatever question she might have. Tsuyu sat down beside Inko and turned to watch the others while she thought about how to say what had been on her mind for a long time now. Shaking her head and deciding to just be blunt, as always she spoke, "I don't want you to take this the wrong way, Mama Doria." Mitsuki squealed a bit at the cute nickname, "but I need to know. How much longer do I have to wait before I can share the other palpa fruit with Izuku and the girls?" Inko jerked momentarily before sighing in resignation. "Always the blunt one, Kaachan." Tsuyu nodded at the question, even though she wasn't looking at Inko at the moment. "The answer is whenever your parents let you." "Karo." Tsuyu looked at Inko questioningly with her head tilted to the side and her finger on her chin. "I thought I had to get your permission first, Mama Doria." Inko chuckled a bit. "While I appreciate you asking for my permission, I feel I should tell you that I don't have a problem if every single one of you kids out there, other than Eri, decided that you all wanted to be together romantically. I am personally counting down the years until I start getting to spoil grandchildren. You have my permission anytime you'd like. You just need permission from your parents." Tsuyu sat there, stunned and staring at the young mother, as if searching for a hint of a lie. Deciding that she didn't find one, she nodded at Inko and stood to rejoin the others in the water. "Thank you, Mama Doria. I had already spoken with my parents about the issue a few weeks ago, and they sounded like they were okay with it then, but I will confirm it again and have them call you to be sure." "Kara." Mitsuki and Masaru stared at the frog girl as she hopped back into the water on the other side of the kids, still competing in throwing each other off the other's shoulders in an actually impressive display of leg strength. "Inko, did that 10-year-old just ask you to marry your son and his future brides?" Masaru asked once he'd managed to get his head mostly back on right. "Yep," Inko replied while popping the P at the end. Pleased as punch at what just happened. She said her parents were already on board with it. "She's 10, Mitsuki said incredulously. "Frogs are usually not monogamous. Baru and Ganma Azui want Tsuyu to be happy in life, and they know Izuku and the others make her very happy. They all want to get into the same profession when they grow up, and all of them have spent at least a year by now telepathically linked to each other and stayed best friends. I'm not going to stop her if she wants into the future romantic relationship, and I doubt her parents will either. Also, in case you haven't noticed it yet, Kaachan is absolutely adorable," Inko said as she returned to watching the kids. Their worlds suitably shaken, they joined Inko in watching the kids again, though Masaru did offer to apply sunscreen for the ladies every so often. They both agreed and did the same for him. Still unsure of the possibility of a relationship between the three of them, with Katsuki still being an unknown entity, they refused to go any further, but looks and grunts of appreciation were fair game as far as they were concerned. The sun had started to set by the time everyone was out of the water and dried off enough to catch the train back to the Todoroki estate, and from there return to their own homes for showers and dinner. The kids had gotten together in the treehouse and cooked their own meal with the ramen broth Himiko had started the day before, while everyone else pitched in to prep the other ingredients. Inko and the Bakugos joined them all once they had gotten the guest room set up for the two adults to use for the week. The ramen was received with much praise from everyone, with the only real complaint a half-hearted one from Mitsuki about it not being spicy enough, which prompted Izuku to bring her his jar of special chili oil. She asked Izuku if she could have a jar of it to take home in a week, and he told her where to find one of the other sealed jars in the pantry and mentioned that if it wasn't spicy enough, he could help her make a hotter version at some point in her stay. The entirety of the rest of the room watched the exchange with various looks of horror on their faces. They'd all tried that oil. It could set fire to water. Even Masaru, who was used to eating spicy food due to his quirk and living with Mitsuki and Katsuki, couldn't stand more than a spoonful or so in his bowl, and Mitsuki and Izuku each put 3 spoonfuls into theirs. I need ice cream for dessert from just watching them. Karo, Tsuyu, as the first person to regain their voice, said to the others, unable to look away from the tragedy unfolding in front of them. That sentiment was matched by the others at the table, the two in question completely oblivious to their reactions, too wrapped up in their own apparent joy at the food they were eating. As it turns out, a lot can happen in 8 years. Since the fall of All for One, Nizu had freed up a lot of his resources to work on other projects, much to the benefit of society. He started with investigating corrupt politicians, utilizing several people with lie detecting or data gathering quirks. His search and takedowns led to the vacancies of nearly 2/3 of the seats in the governing body of Japan and a mountain of evidence showing the resurgence of several quirk supremacy groups and a doomsday cult calling themselves Hummerais. His actions against the corrupt government allowed those still in office to begin making changes in the election process that garnered near 100% acceptance ratings from the populace. Each and every candidate had to submit to lie-detecting quirks before their application to run for office would be accepted. They were only asked 3 questions by default. Do you have ties to any group on the terrorist watch list? Was the first question. The politicians were given a list to verify they were or were not part of or affiliated with any of the groups listed. Are you running on the orders of someone else? Was the second question, to ensure that the people running for public office actually serve the public and not someone trying to take control over the government. Are you attempting to take over the country or facilitate the takeover of the country for anyone else? Was the third question, this one because of the evidence Nizu had gathered when taking down the previous politicians. If anyone gave a false answer to either of these 3 questions, they were immediately barred from running for public office and taken into police custody for further questioning. These changes led to a massive shift in political rhetoric, shifting from the previous near apathy towards swathes of the population to sweeping reforms in the social support systems and public school boards. Crime rates began to fall steadily, starting roughly 6 months after the new politicians took office. Naturally, after rooting out the political support for the groups he discovered, Nizu turned his attention directly on said groups. He began to systematically remove all of the support bases for the terrorist groups he'd become aware of, which eventually led to his discovery of the new Meta Liberation Army and their indoctrination camps disguised as schools. It was this line of investigation that ended up putting together the rest of the puzzle as to why it had taken so long for Katsuki to become a decent human being. Nizu had discovered that even after the collapse of the Aldera School District, which he had confirmed was one of the indoctrination bases, Katsuki had been transferred into another of the school systems they managed to secure a hold in. Notably, though, the members were planted after Katsuki joined the school and therefore weren't caught in Detective Sakachi's preliminary search. The members of the MLA were fighting tooth and nail to reverse the effects of the boy's therapy while he was attending school. It took Nizu just 8 months to crush the indoctrination camps targeting the youths of Japan and a year longer to track down the MLA's bases of operation, leading to a military takeover of Daika City and the arrest of one Rikiya Yatsubashi and his supporters, as well as the dissolving of the Shueisha Publishing Company and Detonarat, along with several other companies that were financially or rhetorically supporting their movement. The trials for the leadership of their organization took a further 2 years to complete, each of them earning a guilty sentencing and landing in Tartarus prison. Once he had finished gathering the information on the MLA, Nizu set his sights on Hummerais. Seeing them as a real and potent threat to the safety of the general populace of the world, he began working with foreign governments to track down their bases of operation and put together strike teams to arrest and detain the leaders of the cult. Sadly, several of the highest-ranking cultists decided to take themselves out rather than be captured and interrogated. The eventual collapse of the cult took a full year and 2 months. After removing the terrorists and cultist problems as well as continuing to support a fair and transparent government, Niza took a 4-month break from his crusade where he focused solely on the university and started a reform on several things he'd been wanting to change for years, but had been held back by various members of the board, the government, or the HPSC, which were now removed from their positions after being arrested for their involvement in the previous crackdowns. Once done with his 4 months of seclusion, Nizu came back out into the public with a new target, the HPSC. He had gathered thousands of hours of footage and various evidence of horrific acts the organization had committed and went public with his findings. He and the Destinies agency had provided names for each of the members of the HPSC who had either committed the acts or ordered the acts to be committed, and in doing so removed nearly 80% of the management and workforce of the organization, including all of the people in the highest offices. The leaders of the HPSC were given a fair trial, with the entire country watching as all of their past deeds were laid bare. The public called for immediate incarceration and for the release of the scapegoats that had been wrongfully imprisoned on their orders. It was with a light heart and a grateful smile that Lady Nagant returned to active hero duty after nearly 6 years in Tartarus. For the last 4 years, Nizu had been cracking down on abusive foster care homes and orphanages. His investigations had led to the arrest of several hundred abusive caretakers across the country and the improvement of the lives of tens of thousands of children who had been targeted for various reasons and were now being cared for by competent and compassionate support teams. The changes in the child care system had opened up thousands of new job opportunities as caretakers and support workers. The continued efforts here had led to a precipitous drop in crime rates, and it had been found that most of the abusive or neglectful caretakers who had been arrested were selling off children to Quirk traffickers either for profit or to raise child soldiers for the groups that had been taken down recently. The dean had been recognized globally for his diligent work against tyranny and corruption with a Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. He had the award proudly displayed in his office back at UA University and welcomed those in other countries to come to him for advice on how to accomplish what he had in their own backyards. Throughout all of his escapades, no one had noticed how he seemed to become more youthful as time went on rather than becoming haggard with all of the extra work he'd been undertaking. Of course, the dean wasn't the only one ramping up their efforts in new ways. All Might had become a very outspoken activist for the rights of quirkless individuals and those with weaker or undesirable quirks. He had done a now very famous interview with a small-town news station wherein he described his early childhood and early teenage years growing up thinking he was quirkless himself until he was 15. The impact the interview generated was hard to quantify. Nearly every other hero in Japan went on record in support of his goals to create new charities for the betterment of the treatment of those affected by the long-running rhetoric generated by those who wished to do them harm that Niza had taken down. With the removal of Detonarat came the void of support companies for daily life items, a problem that was rectified when the government began a campaign to foster a growth in the STEM fields, which brought forth a problem in society of people only caring about something if it had to do with either quirks or heroics. It took a lot of investigative research, but it was eventually found out that this had been a long-running plan orchestrated by All for One to weaken society to make it easier for himself to rule. Once this information had gone public, as well as the general information about the Quirk boogeyman, public support for subjects in school and in the workplaces not focused on quirks or heroes hit a high that hadn't been seen since the dawn of quirks. This led to the renewal of the space program, and plans were being put together for both manned and unmanned missions to the moon and further in the near future. Something Ochako and Mina were elated about. Ochako had actually been asked to help launch a few new satellites, which netted her and her family very healthy additions to their nest eggs. Mina had forced the group to watch her favorite space-based movies for a month after hearing the news about the redeveloping space race. Naturally, there weren't only positive outcomes over the course of nearly a decade of political and social turmoil. Inko had, unfortunately, given up her plans to get together with Mitsuki and Masaru when it was found that Katsuki hadn't made enough progress to be allowed to interact with Izuku after another year since the Bakugo parents first visited the Midoriya residence. When it was finally discovered why the boy had taken so long to make progress, all three adults were understandably upset, but had come to accept that they just weren't going to be romantically involved. Though Inko was starting to see someone new now and had just not told her kids yet, wanted to wait to be sure it wasn't a fling before introducing them. The biggest change for the kids and their parents, though, had been when they were cleared to consume the holly berries. Once the trial runs were done with the younger teachers at UA, then the older staff at UA were confirmed to very slowly regress physically back to their primes. The rest were given the okay to have one if they wanted. The first major changes this brought were when Nizu and Recovery Girl ate one each. In the months following, it became not just difficult, but impossible to hide the fact that Shizenji Chiyo was looking younger and younger as time went on. It wasn't until she was caught on camera 2 years after consuming the berry, when she left UA to provide emergency relief at a disaster site, where news outlets discovered and ran a story on the woman shooting back up from 115 centimeters to 165 centimeters in height and looked nearly 20 years younger. She made a brief comment at the time that the change was due to the effect of an accidental use of a quirk belonging to a minor, and therefore she refused to give any further details. The media on site tried their best to get any extra information out of her on the scene, but she barred them from entering the medical tents and began to blatantly ignore them until she returned to UA, where the media was prevented from accosting her. All of this was all well and good, but Izuku was currently panicking. He had just woken up and was close to having a nervous breakdown, actually. His nerves were frayed so badly that Eri barged into his room and smacked him across the face twice to get his attention before hugging him and telling him how big of an idiot he was being. It took several minutes before Izuku calmed down enough to stop blaring his anxiety through his link to the others, much to the appreciation of all. Izanai, you're gonna do fine. You've practiced this dozens of times now. You've got the entire process memorized, and you're prepared for anything that could possibly go wrong. Stop it with the mental mumble storm and calm down. You have to eat something for breakfast before we get you all ready to go, Eri told her older brother, rubbing circles on his broad back while she sat next to him on the bed. She could barely lay her head on his shoulder anymore after he shot up in height last year. Sorry, Eri-chan, sorry everyone. Just nervous. I'll try to keep it under control now. Let's go get something light to eat, okay? Izuku managed to respond to his sister beside him and to the others who might already be awake, receiving a grumble in response from Shoto and Sun, but no one else seemed to be up. That's the spirit. Last one down gives the other a foot rub, she shouted as she jumped off his bed, sprinted to his door, and flung herself down the hallway. Izuku could only chuckle at her antics and give thanks that Himiko wasn't here this morning, or she'd be very upset at the noise. Last time Eri did this, it frightened her out of her sleep so suddenly that she attached herself to the ceiling by accident. Resolving himself to giving his sister her foot rub, at some point he stood up and stretched his back, feeling every bone pop from the base of his spine to the base of his neck. He hobbled to his closet and grabbed the closest shirt, one of his few gag shirts he had left after the Yui purge last year. He checked himself in the mirror and noted that his shirt read shoes, which was enough to make him giggle a little before he made his way down to the kitchen to get started on breakfast for the three of them. Inko joined the two at the table shortly after he had her place set, and they had their meal in relative silence, both women wanting to give Izuku time to run through the day's schedule in his own head. It was times like this that Inko was glad she stopped herself from sharing one of the friend fruits with her children. Eri's face was telling her that Izuku had accidentally been broadcasting his thoughts again. Inko watched as he finished the last bite of fish before standing up and taking his dishes to the kitchen to wash, and sending Eri to make sure he got upstairs and took a shower. Izuku stayed mostly wrapped up in his own thoughts, privately this time, as he washed, dried, and dressed himself for the day in more formal clothing. He was in the final steps of hyping himself up and was ready to head out any time, though with a glance to his clock he noted that he was well over an hour early for his departure time. He made his way back down the stairs to spend some extra time with his mom while they waited for Eri to join them, just chatting about any possible new additions to the pickable stock for the produce stores. In this way, they waited out the time until the alarm went off, and they headed over to grab their shoes and went through the garden dimension to a temporary door leading to a private room in a small building being rented to them for the day. His first steps out of the building and into the late morning sun brought his hand up to shield his eyes from the glare and allowed him to see that most of his friends and family had gathered in the courtyard across the street, and most of them had begun waving to their small group when they were noticed. It had taken a lot of planning and subterfuge to get this venue at this time of day, and without being swamped by the press once a random passerby happened to look inside and realized what was going on and with who. The three made their way over, and Izuku was ushered through the throng of people, shaking hands and receiving hugs the whole way, until he was pulled into the foyer of the large wooden building by one of the staff members selected to host the proceedings today. He was shown to his changing room and found the room already occupied by two other workers assigned to help with his garments. He tried not to get embarrassed and did mostly okay. 10 minutes later, he was pulled into a larger room where everyone he'd seen outside had been gathered and were sitting or standing around the edges, leaving plenty of space between themselves, the door, the center of the room where a large table sat, and the shrine on the opposite wall to where he entered from. Young Izuku, it is good to see you again, and congratulations on your big day, came the subdued for him voice of Yagi Toshinori. The two had gotten together to discuss issues the quirkless were facing when Toshi had stopped by one day while planning his first few rallies, and the two hit it off quite well. It had, of course, helped that Izuku's Senzabine had saved Toshi's life beforehand, but it was the discussion that cemented their friendship. "Thank you, Toshi. I'll be honest, I'm pretty nervous," came his reply, though it was, thankfully, without a single stutter. "I'd be shocked if you weren't, after all. This doesn't just happen every day." He barked out through his laughter while playfully ruffling the young man's hair. "I'd die if I had to do this every day." Izuku whined in response, which earned some laughter from those in earshot. Well, as Yagi-san said, "Congratulations, Izuku. I'm very proud of you, my student, and I hope you have a great day today," came a familiar voice from Toshi's shoulder where Niza popped his head up and over to look down at Izuku. "Thank you, Sensei. I'm sure I'll have a great day after the ceremony. Until it's over, though, I think my heart might explode," came the polite but still obviously flustered reply from Izuku, who was still managing not to stutter. He was greeted by everyone in the room and given well wishes by them all, just before a man wearing a traditional jo followed by two women in red hakama and white kosode, the priest and his two miko, respectively walked in from behind the shrine and took their places while gesturing to Izuku to take the central spot directly opposite themselves across the table. They were followed by several other miko, carrying a large bowl that was placed in the center of the table, and a wide assortment of rice, sake, fruit, and vegetables were placed on the altar behind the priest. The extra miko left the room and returned carrying several gourds containing high-quality, traditionally made sake, which were poured into the large bowl on the table, while 27 sake cups in 3 different sizes were placed around the table in a semicircle facing towards the altar. Izuku stepped up to his position at the table and stood respectfully with his hands held together in front and his feet parted to shoulder width. His black kimono was of the traditional style as requested by Inasuke and Ko. He wasn't going to argue with them. Eri had told him that it looked great on him when he was trying it on a month ago. He stood there patiently waiting until the doors to the sides opened and out walked 8 of the most important people in his life. They filed out in the order that he met them, and each wore a traditional all-white shiromaku for the occasion. They took their places around the table with Ochako and Momo to each side of him, followed by Kyoka and Himiko, then Mina and Tsuyu, and finally Kinoko and Yui. Each was wearing very minimal makeup applied by the staff at the location and holding various small objects in their hands that were attached to their kimonos to prevent dropping accidents. Izuku could see the nerves plainly written on Ochako, Kyoka, and Kinoko's faces, and the glee on Momo, Himiko, and Mina's faces. Those not familiar enough with Tsu or Yui could be forgiven for thinking they looked bored or expressionless. But Izuku had known them long enough to see the subtle tells that let him know they were both nervous and excited. The priest called for the remaining tables to be placed around the room for the guests to sit, and more fruits and bottles of sake with cups were placed upon the tables for everyone to enjoy when appropriate. Once everyone other than Izuku and the girls were seated, he began the process for the most important event of Izuku's life so far. His wedding ceremony had begun. The priest purified the shrine and called the attention of benevolent spirits, then announced the Sansen Kudu, which, admittedly, had to be changed slightly to accommodate the decidedly non-traditional type of wedding they were having, as when Shinto weddings were popular, polyamory wasn't. It was decided that rather than passing a cup between each of them back and forth 3 times for each and every member, they would all fill a cup, take a small sip, then pass it to the right, repeating the process until the cup reaches the final member of the group wedding before the original drinker, who would drink the remaining sake in the cup before filling the slightly larger cup and passing it back the opposite way. The process repeated once more with the largest cup until it too was empty, and the group moved from around the table towards the altar, where Izuku read his vows to his brides. They tried desperately not to ruin their makeup by crying. He mentioned his best man Tenya, who stood at his table and bowed respectfully before getting seated again, as the friends and family raised their cups along with Izuku, and the women up front, and their new cups, and shouted Kinpai. The priest set an evergreen as an offering at the altar in gratitude to the spirits that blessed the ceremony as the brides and groom moved to the doors on the sides of the room to retrieve their own offerings to the spirits, followed by their parents with their own offerings. The rings were then presented by the Miko to the brides and groom, while the priest invoked Izanagi and Izanami during the closing prayers. The process lasted a full 30 minutes before the priest declared the ceremony complete and left the room with the staff and Miko. Izuku and his new wives immediately slumped slightly and made their way back to their family and friends to pose for the photos they knew were going to be taken. The photos took another 20 minutes, and finally the newly married group was led out to a waiting limousine, which ferried them to the restaurant that had been booked for the evening for them all. The reception was great. Having changed into more comfortable clothes so as not to ruin their wedding attire, they enjoyed themselves and the hilarious impromptu speech Denki and Ijiro tried to give. Izuku was quite intrigued when he noticed his mother sitting quite close to Ain and San, and he had planned to go grill the two of them, but was sidetracked by Ochako and Himiko pulling him over to their wives for another set of pictures now that they weren't wearing the stuffy wedding kimonos and were just in the more comfortable kimonos they had picked for the occasion. Maybe they should have decided on a theme, though, as there was essentially a color explosion on display here, mostly coming from Mina and Himiko, though Kyoka did add lots of darker splashes to the palette. As the night wound down and the congratulations were given for the final time, the group made their way back to the limousine to be ferried back to the temporary door where they split off from everyone else and wished them all a good night from within the garden dimension. It was to their credit that the guys and the newest additions to their linked group only teased them for a few minutes about what would be happening for the rest of the night. Ijiro left along with his date for the evening, a recently made but very good friend, Melissa Shield, to much playful prodding from the other guys and a sympathetic smile from Izuku, while Tenya and his date, another new friend, Meihatsum, waited to be the last to leave from their friend group so he could give them all a hug and wish them well for the evening as they left to his home. The parents of the 9 newlyweds stayed briefly to tell them to have a good night and to be careful, and left just as the situation was starting to get awkward. "Finally, it's over," shouted Mina as she bounced up and down holding Himiko, who was every bit as excited about the formalities of the day being over. "Oh, come on, girls, it wasn't that bad now, was it?" came the reply from Momo, even as she removed the heels she was wearing and enjoyed the feeling of the soft grass between her toes, which of course prompted the others to do the same. "Objectively, no, it wasn't bad, and I'll remember today for the rest of my life, Karo," commented Sue before she finished with a grin, speaking as a person who doesn't really like wearing heels nor enjoys standing through rigid ceremonies, though. "It was a long day, Karo. You're telling me, Sue? My poor feet are going to need some much-need rest and relaxation," Kanoko said, making sure to always toss a pun into the mix, which was suitably groaned at much to her enjoyment. "I think you're all wasting time. If I know Izuku, and I do, then he has prepared several fun things for us to try tonight while we consummate our marriage," Yui said through their bond to avoid the link, bringing blushes to everyone's faces and prompting them all to look up into Izuku's face for confirmation. He managed to give them a confident smirk and a nod, which was really all the information they needed as they raced to the elevator to get up into the treehouse. He laughed and sent them the message that he would be right up as he walked around and picked a basket of the fun things he had prepared for their first night as husband and wives. It turns out the favorite of the night was a plum that causes everyone who shares it to share their senses for half a day, though it was closely followed by a cucumber, which allowed one to temporarily gain the reproductive organs of the opposite gender. That one was a fun one to bring up to the ladies. Everything you're imagining definitely happened. The next day, the newlyweds spent the next day to themselves thanks to the politeness of all of their friends and family, giving them their own little honeymoon time, though Momo had already booked them an actual honeymoon without telling Ochako. Izuku had bribed the others with a plan of their choice to give him and his wives the day to themselves. That day was spent in various states of undress for all involved. It was unanimously agreed to be one of the best days ever. 3 days later, the Midoriya household was packed with young adults finishing their dinners, Katsuki having joined them when he heard they were making mapo tofu. He had, over the years, mellowed out and did eventually apologize to Izuku, though it's possible that the murderous looks from the girls Izuku had just married might have prompted the apology to be a bit more sincere than it otherwise would have been. Now, though, he was enjoying one of the best things about reconnecting with Izuku, his cooking. Specifically, any time Izuku was in charge of cooking and he was making something spicy. It was all because of that goddamn miracle chili oil. Katsuki couldn't get enough of that stuff. Izuku and the hag loved it too. He noticed that they both used 4 tablespoons of the oil in their dish while everyone else got the default half tablespoon, the pansies. Katsuki thanked the hosts by doing the dishes before leaving, but not before hearing Ponytail shouting something unintelligible. She's in a house surrounded by her husband and wives. She'll be fine, he thought to himself, having not bothered to use the link he was pressured into getting by his old hag. The story he got later from Shitty Hair made him wish he'd stayed to watch, though. Ijiro was sent a screenshot of the text conversation Mina had with Kyoka and Himiko that night and couldn't resist showing it to the rest of the guys. It was the highlight of the week. Mina, why is Momo screaming and crying? Kyoka, she kissed Izuku. Mina, yeah, that's not new though. Himiko, he had his heathen chili for dinner. Mina, oh R.I.P. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to address the elephant in the room that is this year's entrance exams, said a voice from the head of the meeting table, his chair slowly rotating to face towards the others in the room. Must he always be so dramatic? Was the exasperated response from everyone else present. We have 15 candidates that, by any measure, are leaps and bounds ahead of any other applicant. In both academics and heroic prowess, they are all well and truly above the rest of the first-year applicants and most of the second-year students. The figure, now revealed to be Dean Nizu, continued, holding a cup of tea that no one could figure out how he got. The problem now is that we all know these 15 applicants and most of us have had a hand in their training for the last several years. We cannot be trusted to remain neutral in judging them. We also know that there is very little chance for any of them to fail. What are your suggestions? There was silence from the rest of the room until someone cleared their throat. Seems to me that we should leave the testing of the young-ins to a third party, came the southern drawl of a man in a cowboy hat. Just who do you propose we trust with the physical examinations of our potential future student, Snipe? Replied a large man in a red suit sporting short gray hair and large fangs. It was just a suggestion, Vlad. Feel free to make one yourself, partner. We can have the teachers and medical staff that haven't interacted with them be in charge of testing them, suggested a woman in a puffy astronaut suit with her helm sitting on the table in front of herself. There is some merit to that, Ainen, nodded Nizu, who took another sip of tea and nodded to the other faculty for any more suggestions or alternatives. Do we know who hasn't worked with them before? Vlad asked, running his forefinger over his chin. Snipe, Ectoplasm, Hound Dog, Power Loader, Cementos, yourself, Vlad, the non-hero staff members including the medical staff other than Chio. Nizu answered without missing a beat. So 5 heroics teachers and roughly 24 others of various specialties then? We can work with that. Vlad nodded. You're forgetting an important question, said a lanky man with a frankly ridiculous blonde mohawk. Should we even bother putting them through an entrance exam? We can't just let them into the most prestigious heroics academy in the country without an entrance exam, Mike, called out a man in a long coat wearing a dark mask with his teeth on display. Nizu, is there any doubt in your mind that the whole group would pass? Mike countered with a question to the one who's had the biggest influence on the young adults in question. Not a chance, said Nizu gleefully as he munched into a hibiscus tea cake. Then why are we having a discussion on how to do their entrance exam if we all know they're going to pass? Asked the woman sitting next to Mike wearing a skin-tight purple bodysuit and dark corset and boots. You'll remember that I never asked how to test them for their entrance exams. I only asked what to do with 15 applicants so clearly ahead of the others. Nizu said and waved his paw again to continue asking for suggestions. The way I see it, we have 2 big problems with them, grumbled a man in a black jumpsuit with a gray scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. Please elaborate, Aizawa? Vlad asked. First is the problem of where to put them all in regards to the class breakdowns. All 15 have been a tight-knit friend group for 7 or 8 years now. If you've all read their files, you'll note that they're all telepathically linked to each other. We either need to split them evenly between the two classes or keep them all together in one class. On the one hand, we run the risk of sabotaging them socially or causing the other class to feel inadequate. That is a fair point, and not something I had considered initially, growled another member of staff covered in thick fur who was currently leafing through the files in question. Neither of those options are good, though. I'll need to think on how to combat the issue of either causing a rift or trying to lessen potentially 25 new inferiority complexes. I may have a solution to the issue, Hound Dog, Niza said, and turned back to Aizawa, but please continue with the other problem, Eraserhead. Aizawa grunted in acknowledgement. The other issue is that 9 of the 15 are married. Vlad spit the tea he was drinking out. Thankfully to the side, missing the other faculty members. They're what? He turned to his fellow first-year homeroom teacher. What do you mean 9 of them are married? Their files didn't mention that at all. It's a new development, Kansas, replied the woman in the bodysuit. How new are we talking here, Namuri? Vlad asked, wanting clarification. You remember last week when Shota, Yamada, Nizu, Toshi, Chio, and myself took work off on the same day? Vlad nodded, but grew an incredulous look that knew. Fantastic. So we have at least one polyamorous throuple and possibly 3 other newly married couples? The Blood Hero asked, already getting close to being done with this year, before they even had a student roster. Oh no, Kansas, Mike answered, it's all one big polycule, he exclaimed, barely avoiding activating his quirk while shouting. Cammy, help us all, the man said, hanging his head and wishing he had his flask. So as I was saying, there is a group of newlyweds to plan around. Most of us know there's no danger of procreation, thanks for one of their quirks, but breaking up the married group needs to be discussed if we're splitting the whole group apart. There's also planning for the dorms. Do we give them the normal dorm suites, or do we do something special for them? Aizawa finished his second point in the same deadpan delivery as before. Why should they be treated specially? They're students, same as everyone else. We may not be able to keep them away from each other outside of classes, but there's no reason for us to make concessions in housing for 9 students, asked one of the teachers from the management department. If the problem is funding, we don't need to worry about it, Niza said as he was scrounging around in his tea cabinet, causing everyone to jump in their seats as no one saw him leave his chair. 8 of the 15 are quite wealthy, and 5 of those 8 are part of the married group. They would have no problem paying for special accommodations. Be that as it may, how would the optics pan out if the media learned about the special circumstances behind the altered dorm? Asked another of the management instructors. I won't lie, that might cause a stir, Niza said as he brought out a packet of tea he seemed intent on using, but the same can be said of almost anything else that goes on at this university, such as the burden of popularity. We've had married couples in the school before. The media threw a fit then and got over it. They'll do the same now. That is, assuming news gets out about the altered dorms. He began setting up his teapot, paused, then looked around the table. Tea, anyone? It's quite the blend. Helps with stress. Izuku? Asked Aizawa. New blend. Notes of Arabica beans and orange zest. Nizu replied. The professors politely accepted the offer, though some were curious when several of the heroics professors didn't hesitate to accept. Nizu put away his standard teapot and walked over to the wall, where he pressed a panel in with his paw, and a hidden door opened, revealing a tea brewing station equipped with a rather large porcelain teapot. He began preparing the tea leaves as he motioned for the rest to continue discussing the dorms. Well, if funding and optics aren't issues, then we would only need to worry about the reactions from the other students, said one of the support department professors, while thumbing through the files again. I'll admit to some curiosity, though, about not being worried about procreation. Are they celibate? No, Namuri said, giggling a little in response. From what I've seen, they very much so are not. It's just that there's no danger of unexpected pregnancies thanks to one of their quirks. I've been using the same method myself since I met the little one nearly 10 years ago. I want to chat with you about that later in private, Nem, said Ainin as she absently ran a finger over the helmet in front of her, but back on the topic. I don't see the need to worry about the other students' response. Just tell them that the changes were paid for by the students themselves, and it should get rid of any further issues. Kurosan makes a good point. It's really none of the other students' business how their peers choose to sleep while attending university, as long as the group doesn't lord it over the rest of their classmates. The very large man sitting next to Namuri weighed in, his voice booming regardless of his not shouting. As All Might said, if they're paying for the altered dorm room and don't antagonize the other students, I see no problems. Agreed what looked like a blocky man made of cement. All right, that takes care of the dorm issue then, Niza said as he began passing tea around the table to the others as he pushed a cart around the table. On to the big change I was thinking about for this school year, he continued as he placed the last cup down by Powerloader's hands, the man himself having taken the excavation equipment off for the meeting. You mentioned this might be a solution to the first issue, Aizawa brought up Dean? Hound Dog asked, with very little growling involved. Yes, you see I wanted to try merging the two heroics classes this year. Both the classes themselves and the dorm buildings. The large group of linked people presents issues that we've already gone over, however those issues are countered by not splitting the classes at all. It'll be a large class size, yes, but it would let us try to have a year without the Class A and B rivalry, and we can see how it works for future incoming students as well. Aizawa and Vlad would serve as co-homeroom teachers, and we can cycle in third and fourth years in between work studies as teaching assistants to alleviate the increased workload from having 40 students in one class. There's some merit to that, said Aizawa offhandedly before getting interrupted by his cohort. We have entirely different teaching styles and methods. Your logical ruses cause your students to distrust you, and I refuse to allow that kind of rift between the students and myself, Vlad argued in a steely tone. It's a good thing we'd both be present, then, isn't it? Aizawa responded while enjoying his first taste of the new tea blend. This is a very good blend, Nizu. I'll tell the boy it has my seal of approval, if you haven't already. Please, said the Chimera while he also enjoyed his first taste. Anyway, my ruses help to teach the students that they can't trust the intel they get. You're free to play good cop to my bad cop if you want. I also don't agree with the near militaristic way you run your classes. They're not soldiers. They're training to be public servants and to defend the public from threats within the country, not to act as deterrents from outside threats, Aizawa said as he continued sipping his tea. To the side, Namuri and Yamada were having a whispered conversation with Ainen about the tea and placing bets on which first-year professor snaps first. Nizu jokingly put his name down for Vlad cracking first. All Might covered his mouth with one of his massive hands to prevent the sounds of his stifled laughter from getting out. I'm willing to try the merge class idea for the year. I want to know if it's a more effective method of teaching the students than the separated classes and the bickering rivalry that normally goes on between the two. It's only logical, Aizawa said, offering his hand to the other first-year heroics professor. Vlad King looked at the hand being held out to him with undisguised hesitance. He'd been stoking the rivalry between himself and Aizawa since the other teacher started working here 4 years ago. Eventually, however, he sighed and reached forward to shake the other man's hand in agreement. I agree that we should find out if this is a better method. We should have a chat after the meeting to figure out how we're going to approach running the classes and see if we need to alternate working with the other professors when one of us would have a free period normally. Good. Now that we've covered that set of issues, let's move on to the other issues on the docket. Niza cackled, clearly enjoying how the discussion had panned out and his new tea. Let's discuss any changes that need to be made for the other 25 spots. The other faculty members groaned at the realization that they'd only covered the first issue on the itinerary. Post-entrance exams. A large group of people is seen walking together while holding a giant net above themselves which covers easily several tons of boxes and beds. It was easily the most confusing thing the older students who saw them walking by had witnessed this month. The group seemed to be walking towards the newly constructed first-year dorms area and were amicably chatting with each other about things no one else could hear. I still say I should have been allowed to take the general entrance exam, shouted a blonde with red eyes. I had been looking forward to letting loose finally against robots ever since we found out the exam was just destroying robots. Easy there, Katsuki, said a young man with spiked and dyed hair while reaching over and putting his hand on the blonde's shoulder. There will be plenty of opportunities to really let loose while we're here for the next 4 years. It's going to be so manly. Yeah, whatever, shitty hair, The blonde grumbled and turned his head away from the other man, though he notably didn't remove the other's hand from his shoulder. "Hey now, no insulting people, Kaachan," said Izuku, playfully glaring at his old best friend, turned bully, turned new friend / brother figure. "Ani Mitsuki told us to watch you to make sure you weren't being rude to our classmates." "It's all good, Izubro. I know he doesn't mean it." "Katsuki is just a little bummed about not getting to fight some robots for stress relief," said Ijiro in defense of the guy he was still holding the shoulder of, not really paying attention to where the group was walking and nearly missing it when they walked up to a small group of other students who were eyeing them curiously. "Hi there, Kendo Itsuka. Nice to meet you all," said the redhead at the front of the small group, standing at the opening to the walkway leading to the dorm building. She was flanked by a young man with silver metallic-looking skin, a young woman with spiky teeth displayed in a huge grin, another girl with vines for hair, and a man with strange protrusions on his elbows with a somewhat flat-looking face. The others politely introduced themselves as well, before Kendo chose to continue talking as they walked down the walkway together. "So you are all first years in the heroics course too?" "Yep," said Himiko, who chose to have matching green eyes with Izuku today, emphasizing the P at the end with a pop. "All of us are in the heroics course this year." "What Himiko said? We're all excited to be here, and we can't wait to work with you guys for the next 4 years," said Ochako, waving her free hand in an excited manner which the others found incredibly endearing. The group made it to the door and set the net down on the lawn to the side of the door as Ochako deactivated her quirk and let the boxes fall gently to the ground so they could all pick out their own luggage, and Yui shrank everything down to fit in their hands as they moved in through the doorway and made their way to the key holder where the building layout was posted. The group separated from the new people as they all began dropping off their luggage in their new dorm rooms and asking Yui via their link to reverse her quirk when they were ready to begin unpacking. The Midoriyas were all admiring their large dorm suite together and paid particular attention to the bed Momo was placing down in the bedroom that took up almost all of the floor space. It was lucky they were able to pay for the alterations to the building to allow the separate room for closet space and a sizable room for studying that was now lined with their favorite bean bags and fold-out tables. Altogether, it took them a little over an hour to get unpacked, and they made their way into the kitchen to begin preparations for lunch and dinner while everyone else was still arriving or unpacking. It was to the sight of all 9 of them working together in the kitchen, preparing a huge spread of different options for lunch and starting the stock to use for dinner over a low flame. More than a few people had stood in the doorway to the kitchen and were simply staring at the clearly well-practiced team cooking away together. The smells were drawing in more and more of the new classmates by the minute. "Is it just me, or do they look particularly domestic?" whispered a set of floating clothes. Itsuka would deny it if you said she jumped when she heard the disembodied voice beside her, but managed to get herself together quickly enough to address what seemed to be a girl with an invisibility quirk who was asking her a question. "I was just going to ask about that, actually." "So it wasn't just me?" asked Setsuna. The girl the larger group had met outside before with the spiky teeth in a conspiratorial whisper. Toru, the presumed invisible girl, squealed quietly and turned to the others beside her. "Do you smell some tea being spilled in theirs?" Setsuna's grin split her entire face at the question, and she draped her arm across the other girl's shoulders. "I smell it too, my romance-loving comrade," she whispered while the others looked at them with raised eyebrows. "Move it," grunted a man squeezing through the crowd in the doorway. "Izuku, don't forget the chili oil," he shouted into the kitchen. "It's on the table already, Kaachan." The tall man sporting a long ponytail of dark but vibrant green hair from his station at the wok. Setsuna was unashamedly staring at the muscular back on display with hungry eyes. "Good. Do you need any help with anything?" The blonde, Kaachan, clearly a nickname, asked the group cooking away in their own little world with what Setsuna and Toru could now see was several instances of soft caresses between everyone in the group. Their eyes were widening and sparkling in recognition. "We should be fine, Katsuki, but thank you for the offer. Lunch will be ready in 15 to 20 minutes if you want to start prepping the table and making sure we have enough places for all 40 to 45 of us." Momo responded while she was watching the roux she was stirring. "Momo's right. Someone should let everyone know soon. Hopefully everyone is here by now. I can't wait to meet all the new people." Mina said while shaking her hips side to side and watching the 4 large pots of water just beginning to come up to temperature. Mina, the pasta won't be ready to go in for another 5 to 8 minutes if you want to go round everyone up, said Kyoka standing next to the pink girl while she was rolling out the dough to use in the pasta, having already handed off the quick rising dough for the breadsticks to Komori on her other side, who had already finished preparing a garlic and truffle oil to paint onto the breadsticks before they went into the oven to bake. I got it, Mina replied as she turned the heat down and ran off to the stairs to let everyone who wasn't already in the kitchen and dining area know. God, I love how energetic she is, Himiko said as she was leaning against the counter, having finished prepping the salads and fruit basket with a wide grin on her face. The look of affection was obvious to anyone who happened to be looking her way. Oh, before I forget, did we bring any blood oranges, Izuku? Of course, Himiko. They're in the pantry, Izuku said as he continued tossing the beginnings of fried rice in 2 woks and gently stirring the other wok of mapo tofu. Himiko nodded and walked over to the pantry, where she pulled what looked like a normal orange with a blood-red band running around the center of the rind. She drew the eyes of several of the new arrivals as she made her way over to one of the available sinks and punctured the orange with her teeth and began skiing the liquid out of it. The looks turned to concern when they noticed a line of blood running down her chin and into the sink where the water was already running. Itsuka was about to check on the girl to make sure she was okay when a rather tall man with short-cut blue hair walked by her and noticed her concern. Don't worry about the blood. Himiko has a blood quirk, and she needs to consume blood as part of her diet. The oranges are a substitute for when we don't know how active we're going to be for the rest of the day, the man, Tenya said as he began helping Katsuki set the table. His words lightened the concern considerably, but left the newcomers confused as nearly everyone was now sitting at the table, and Mina had moved back to the pasta pots and was getting ready to drop the fresh pasta in to cook. How long till you guys are ready? Mina called out to the other cooks. 10 minutes till we can start moving the food to the table. Himiko can start moving the salads and fruits over now if she wants, or someone else can help her if they want. Momo responded to the rest, having given the other cooking stations a quick glance to check. Pasta going in, the cheerful girl called out and got a response from Achiko, who had finished prepping the sauce for the vegetarian pasta to confirm it was ready any time. Fish is nearly done, came a dull response from Yui on the end next to Ochako. She was flipping several dozen salmon fillets for the final time and getting some help from Komori, who had a minute while she was waiting for the breadsticks and had finished helping Kyoko with cutting the various pasta shapes. Momo could be seen grabbing the pot of elbow pasta and draining it before pouring it into the cheese sauce she had finished. A quick mix, and she poured the mac and cheese into several casserole dishes, which were placed in the oven they had set aside for her to melt the cheese and brown the breadcrumbs she had grated on top of each dish. Izuku had taken the mapo tofu off the heat and set it aside while adding the rice to the woks for the fried rice, one vegetarian, the other chicken. The breadsticks were coming out of the oven just as the last batch of pasta was tossed into the boiling water, ravioli stuffed with a 3-cheese blend. The fish was being moved from the pans into several long serving dishes with dozens of small cups of soy sauce placed to the side. Kyoko looked over to the table and spotted Tenya. Hey Tenya, are Mel and May joining us for lunch or dinner today? She asked while ignoring the look she was getting for using the man's first name after the displays of affection in the kitchen. They will both be joining us for lunch in a few minutes. Melissa had to drag May out of her room where she has set up her personal workbench already. Tenya replied as he finished helping Kinoko set the breadsticks out at the table. Speaking of the girls, the door opened to the two of them chatting with an older man and woman who walked into the dining area with them. The young men and women who didn't recognize the newcomers moved to stand, understanding that they must be staff members and the girls that were just mentioned. Feel free to stay seated. Aizawa and I popped over for a chat and introductions. Professor Sekijiro should be heading over as well in a few minutes. He was held up dealing with a new student who was caught trying to sneak into the girls' dorms. The woman said before remembering that she hadn't introduced herself yet, I am Professor Kiyama, or you can refer to me as my hero persona Midnight, she said with a polite bow. Hello, professors, came the calls of the students who were now all setting up at the table. Are you just doing a meet and greet now, or did you need us for something? Asked Itsuka as she finished helping carry over a tray of mac and cheese. The door opened again, and another adult walked into the building, nodding to the other professors who had taken a seat each at the table, so he moved to join them, sitting on the other side of Namuri. Hello, students. I am Professor Sekijiro Kansas. I will be one of your homeroom teachers this year, the new man said with a polite bow, and when he received one in return from the students, he raised a questioning eyebrow at the other staff next to him. To answer your question, Kendo, Vlad and I are here for a meet and greet. I'm your other homeroom teacher this year, Aizawa Shota, said the man wearing casual clothes. Midnight nodded once, twice, then a grin blossomed on her face. What Aizawa hasn't said and Vlad doesn't know is that we're also here to partake of the Midoriya delicacies, she stated, visibly proud of herself for essentially bumming food off a bunch of first-year university students. Her two co-workers could only groan at her antics, even as the last dish hit the table, that being the wok filled with mapu tofu. Izuku grinned back at the older woman. Not a problem. We already assumed we'd have between 40 to 45 people for lunch, Ms. Kiyama. Don't worry. Everything was made with our own ingredients. Aizawa cocked an eyebrow at the boy. Even the fish? Yui grunted in response with a small nod. It had been her idea to add a set of fish trees to go with the meat trees. The man accepted that at face value and decided to speak up before the large group of people started digging in. Acceptable. Now, before we eat, let's go ahead and get introductions out of the way. It's illogical to waste time and be quick so the food doesn't get cold. Mina bounced in her seat next to Toru and Setsuna, having made fast friends with them already. I'll start. I'm Ishido Midoriya Mina. I like to dance, and my quirk is acid. She pointedly ignored the looks the hyphenated name earned her and looked to Toru to continue. I guess I'm next. I'm Hagakure Toru. I like all things cute, and my quirk is invisibility, the talking clothes said while raising a hand in the air holding a spoon, which was the only indication that she had raised her arm. Hello, I'm Ojiro Mashireo. I am a martial artist, and my quirk is tail, the blonde boy next to Toru said. His most notable feature after the large tail was just how plain he looked. I'll go next then. I'm Sata Rikido. I love to bake, and my quirk is Sugar Rush. He introduced himself while staring at the breadsticks, seemingly in an attempt to dissect them with his eyes. I believe I am next. Greetings. I am Tokoyami Fumikage, a denizen of the night. I enjoy gazing into the abyss, and my quirk is Dark Shadow, the young man said in a deep and spooky-sounding voice as he pointed to the shadow creature that had popped out of his stomach and was reaching for an apple. I'm Dark Shadow. I like to fight, and I love apples. I shall go next if you don't mind. My name is Shiozaki Ibara. I am a devout follower of God, and my blessing is vines, the young woman said while holding her hands in prayer over her plate of salad and salmon. Hi. I'm Koji Koda. I don't tea-talk much, and my quirk I is on voice. The large man sitting next to her said very quietly. If the room wasn't silent during the introductions, no one would have heard him. I am Shoji Mizo. I enjoy hiking and meditating. I'm also a minimalist. My quirk is Dupley arms, as you may have been able to tell. The next very large man said through a mouth he grew at the end of one of his 6 arms, which was so cool. Koda Midoriya Yui. I enjoy tokusatsu, and my quirk is size, she said, also ignoring the even more confused look she was getting at the name. Todoroki Shoto, it's nice to meet you. I enjoy cold soba, and my quirk is half hot, half cold, Shoto said, having become slightly more outgoing in the years since he met the others. Kaminari Denki, at your service. I enjoy anything cool, playing games, and hanging out with friends. My quirk is electrification. Denki shouted from his seat, pointing finger guns at people at random, which earned him a kick to his calf from Kyoka next to him. I'm Jiro Midoriya Kyoka. I enjoy music in all its forms, and my quirk is earphone jack, she said while waving said Jackson greeting, also pointedly ignoring the stares she was getting from the name. I'm Tetsu. I like all things manly, and my quirk is called Steel, the silver-skinned boy beside her shouted, much to Kyoka's ire. Nice man. I'm Kirishima Ijiro. I also like all things manly, and my quirk is hardening, Ijiro said as he and Tetsu banged their hardened forearms together, again much to Kyoka's dismay. I am Kojiro Bondo. I like building model kits, and my quirk is Semidine, a tall man with the head of a... Was that a candle topper or a glue dispenser? Oh, I'm Pony. Tsunatori Pony. I like anime and apples. My quirk is horn cannon. I'm from America, so if I mess up words, I'm sorry, said an adorable young woman with long horns pointed out and up from her head with large eyes. Hello, I am Ida Tinya. I enjoy running, and my quirk is engine. I endeavor to have several rewarding years as your classmate, Tinya said while chopping his right arm up and down for effect. This got a chuckle out of his friend group. I am Jiroda Shishida. I enjoy reading and taking naps. My quirk is called Beast. I also hope to enjoy our time together, said a bespectacled and well-mannered but very hairy young man. I shall go next. My name is Shurhai Kurwaro. I am pleased to see that I have a fellow Abyss Walker in the class, and do hope we can convene at a later time. My quirk is called Black, said a young man with white hair who was seemingly made of the color black nodded sagely towards Tokoyami, who immediately returned the nod. Hello everyone, I'm Ciro Hanta. I enjoy hanging out and playing games, and my quirk is tape. Come see me to lose at Hero Smash. The boy from earlier with the strange protrusions on his elbows introduced himself, and instantly made a target of himself. I'm going to crush you at Hero Smash. I'm Bakugo Katsuki, and I will be the #1 hero. My quirk is Explosion. I'll take you all on at anything. Katsuki essentially exploded out of his chair with his intro. I'm Manga Fukudashi. Yes, I know my parents were cruel when they named me. I enjoy drawing, and my quirk is called Comic, said a man with a... Is his head a speech bubble? A sleepy-looking man was next in line, but he had an expression on his face that told everyone that he'd rather be in bed than at the dining table. I'm Shinso Hitoshi. I like cats, and my quirk is brainwashing, he said and returned to his hunched-over posture, clearly waiting to eat. I'm next. I am Tagaru Kamakiri. I'll fight any one of you anytime you want to throw down. I also like collecting bugs sometimes, and my quirk is razor sharp, the mantis-looking guy said while blades became visible on his arms briefly. Hello everyone, I'm Komori Midoriya Kinoko. I enjoy all things mushroom, and I'm going to become an idol hero. My quirk is Mushroom, she demonstrated by growing a truffle and placing it on the table in front of her while ignoring the glances she got for her name. Yosetsu Aways here. I enjoy playing mobile games, and my quirk is Weld, called out the next in line at the table. Another slightly plain-looking man who was currently shifting his eyes between the food options on the table. Sun Kaibara. I like cameras and enjoy doing photography, so if you want to volunteer as a model, let me know. My quirk is Gyrate, Kaibara said while lazily holding his left arm up and letting his arm begin spinning rapidly for a few seconds. Hello everyone, I am Yairuzuriya Momo. Pleased to make your acquaintance. I enjoy reading and practicing with different types of weapons in my spare time. My quirk is called Creation. Momo introduced herself while standing and giving a polite bow to the rest of the table. She gracefully ignored the increasingly confused glance that were now bouncing between herself and the other girls who had gone before. Hi there, I'm Uraraka Midoriya Ochako. I love Machi, and my quirk is called Zero Gravity. I hope we can get along, Ochako said while waving at everyone and closing her eyes as she smiled to ignore the stares. It's a pleasure for you all. I am Nito Monoma. I hope to help us all grow into the best heroes we can be. I enjoy French cuisine, and my quirk is Copy, the next in line said while giving an exaggerated bow, though he had a face that screamed like it wanted to be punched. More than a little weirded out, the next seat cleared his throat. I am Juzo Hananuki. I enjoy massages, both giving and receiving them, and my quirk is called Softening. I'm Nairenjiki Shota. I really enjoy watching boxing matches, and my quirk is called Twin Impact. I hope we enjoy our time here together, Shota said with yet another polite bow. Hello all. I'm Kendo Itsuka, and I enjoy coffee and motorcycles. I'm always willing to lend a hand, so don't be afraid to ask if you need any. My quirk is Big Fist. The redhead from earlier introduced herself to the rest of the class. Izuku wasn't sure if the willing to lend a hand bit was supposed to be a pun. Hi there, I'm Midoriya Himiko. I enjoy all things cute, especially plushies. My quirk is called Transform. I hope we can all have fun. If you want tips on knife fighting, I'm your girl, she said with a wide smile, fangs fully visible. She was clearly enjoying meeting so many new people and was eyeing Toru intently after hearing about another cuteness lover. She was also skillfully ignoring the looks she was getting for her name, the looks being more intense than the other girls due to not having a hyphenated name. Karo, hello everyone. I'm Ajimidoriya to you, but please call me Tsu. I enjoy rainy days and jelly. My quirk is called Frog. Tsu introduced herself while closely guarding a bowl of jelly Izuku had placed down as the introductions were going along. She didn't even bother to ignore the glances she got. She stared back at them without flinching. I am Cozy Eye Subiraba. I enjoy superhero movies and various ball games. My quirk is called Solidaire, said a young man with slightly strange-looking oval-shaped eyes and large pupils. Greetings all. I am called Reiko Yanagi. I enjoy perusing the web and spooky things. My quirk is known as Poltergeist. I will endeavor to do my best with each of you, a silver-haired woman said as she poked her chopsticks into the ravioli on her plate. Greetings to you all. I am Hiryu Rin. I enjoy sushi and every season other than winter. My quirk is called Scales, said a clearly foreign student sitting next to Izuku. Izuku was pretty sure he was from China, but didn't want to interrupt the introductions. Hello. My name is Midoriya Izuku. I enjoy quirk analysis and gardening. My quirk is called Fantastical Botany. I hope we can all enjoy our time here, as we work to become the best heroes we can be. Izuku said as he was spooning mapo tofu into a bowl to go with his fried rice and salad with apple slices on the side. He was also ignoring the looks he was getting, though he was blushing a fair bit. Setsuna saw the blush, and a predatory grin appeared on her face. Hee, I'm Tokage Setsuna, and I enjoy dinosaurs and snooping out tea to spill. My quirk is called Lizard Tail Splitter, she said as her head popped off and rolled down her arm towards Izuku, where it stopped and smirked in his face, instantly putting him on edge, which she found hilarious. Oh, May and I aren't from the heroics course, but since we're here, I'm Melissa Shield, or Shield Melissa, whichever way you prefer. I am here as a transfer student from I-Island, and I'm part of the support course, Melissa said in her upbeat tone, while visibly holding herself back from the homemade mac and cheese. Oh, I'm supposed to do this too? Okay. I'm Hatsum May, future CEO of Hatsum Industries. I'm also part of the support course with Mel here, and my quirk is Zoom. Feel free to come to me for babies, May said with her trademark manic smile. Babies, came the screams of most of the others around the table. May means her inventions. Honestly, May, I know that you know how people see that phrase. At least try not to give people heart attacks. Melissa chided the pink-haired techie beside her. No promises, May replied as she cackled. Aizawa sighed heavily while piling his plate up. Deciding that was the best he was going to get, he spoke up before the table devolved into a feeding frenzy. Now that introductions are out of the way, a quick word before we eat. He started, much to the dismay of everyone else at the table. He smirked internally. Tomorrow we're going to have a quirk apprehension test at 9 in the morning, so eat a light breakfast and stretch before you arrive in your gym clothes to the testing field. Aside from that, curfew is 10 p.m., and if you need anything, the numbers for your professors are by the key stand. Finally, if you haven't realized that this whole combined class thing is new to us teachers this year due to uncommon circumstances. If you're having issues in classes, let us know, because we're trying to see how this type of class does in comparison to our normal 2 classes of 20 students each. That's it from me. Eat up. Vlad clearly wanted to say something, but Namuri smacked his shoulder and glared at him until he picked up his spoon to try the mapo tofu. Izuku realized he hadn't mentioned the chili oil to anyone yet, so he spoke in between mouthfuls of fried rice. If you want chili oil, it's in the center of the table, but fair warning, use it sparingly unless you really enjoy hot food. I used a teaspoon in the wok with the mapo tofu, so just take that into consideration. Momo, being the most recent victim of the unexpected chili oil lips, spoke up in confirmation. Please take the warning seriously. I haven't had it measured on the Scoville scale yet, but it's not something a normal human being would willingly eat. Even second-hand, it's excruciating. Second-hand, piped up Setsuna with a smirk that turned Momo's face scarlet. Set nearly busted a gut laughing. Lunch was a pleasant affair after that. Many of them trying Izuku's produce for the first time and greatly enjoying the experience. Many compliments were given to the chefs, who did their best to not turn new shades of red. other than Himiko and Mina, who simply ate up the compliments. Shortly after everyone had finished eating, there were no leftovers, much to everyone's chagrin. Shota sat back in his chair and turned towards Izuku, who was already starting to stand up to start clearing the table, and stopped him. Not so fast, Midoriya. Those who didn't cook will do the cleaning. It's the least they can do to repay you all for that meal. Also, Nizu, and I wanted to let you know that the new blend you gave him was very enjoyable. If you have another blend that has coffee notes, I'll happily try them out for you. Izuku sat back down bashfully while noting that Momo had done the same, the rest unable to move just yet. He perked up when he heard the compliments for the tea, though. Thanks for the feedback, Aizawa-sensei. We weren't sure if the coffee notes were going to mess with the other flavors of the tea. I have some here if you want a cup. Shota had a slight glint in his eye at that, and nodded his head while Izuku got up to prepare a large pot of the tea, with Momo assuming at least half of the class would like some as well. The tea was accepted and enjoyed by everyone while Kendo asked for seconds and thirds along with Aizawa. The two gave each other nods of confirmation from one coffee drinker to another before looking at Shinso, who was on his fourth cup with shocked expressions. Dinner was a class-only affair, with new dishes from the Midoriya clan that were enjoyed with as much fervor as lunch was. It was after dinner when Setsuna and Toru grabbed Mina and interrogated her about the names. Like sharks smelling blood, they could sense when there was tea to be spilled. Mina, for her part, wanted dearly to tell them, but she sent the request over the bond, and Momo discussed it with everyone else and decided to call a short meeting in the common room to clear the air once and not have to talk about it later. "Excuse me, everyone," Momo called out, getting the attention of everyone. "Could I please have your attention briefly in the common room to discuss an important topic and maybe a few other topics if need be?" Many grunts from people still too full to move were heard as they did their best to make it to a couch in the common room. "Thank you all. I know some of you are still resting from eating a bit too much at dinner, but we wanted to get this over with before any more pestering happened." Momo started with a bow. As she stood back up, she called the bonded to stand with her and waited until all 9 of them were together. "As a lot of you probably noticed, we share a family name." So you continued Momo's line in her typical blunt manner. "It's not an accident, nor are we siblings, adopted or otherwise," Himiko said with a shit-eating grin on her face, mirrored by Mina, who jumped in next. "We're married," Mina shouted, much to Izuku and Momo's resignation. They couldn't hold it against her, however, and gave the pink woman an affectionate shoulder squeeze, which Mina accepted gratefully. The room was silent for a moment as the news washed over them. But only a moment. The Midoriyas spent the rest of the evening answering questions about their relationship as long as they weren't inappropriate, and collectively left the common room at 9, while reminding everyone about the test tomorrow, which earned a groan from everyone, including the ones still washing dishes in the kitchen, who all collectively told Izuku to leave the kitchen when he offered to help them. "Well then, see if I offer to help with the dishes again." "You will," came the response from everyone who was linked to him as he realized he broadcast his thought to them all. He shook his head and, just before he took the first step up the stairs to their suite, he turned to the room at large again. "Before I forget, we need to have another meeting after the test tomorrow. Aizawa-sensei will be in attendance and Dean Niza might be as well. Good night all. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Deku Had Plant Manipulation Quirk? We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Micmager for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on archiveofourown.org for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations in fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.